All right, so it's 12:35. I say we go ahead and get started. So Christian, and just as a reminder to anybody who just joined, we've got you all on mute, but if you have any questions at all, just go ahead and type it in the chat, and I will be asking Christian those questions for everyone when the time allows.
All right, I'll get rolling through it. Thanks, Kelsey. Just so y'all can look at it real quick one more time, got some housekeeping items up on the screen. So if you can, pin my video. Hopefully my internet's working well enough you can see me talking and kind of keep pace with what's going on. But yeah, we've got about a half hour's worth of material to go through, and we'll do our best as we're going through to answer those questions as well. If not, we'll come back around at the end and answer questions. And then also this meeting is being recorded, so if you have to jump off for whatever reason, it will be available online. I think Kelsey said that'll be on Facebook, and then is it on your website as well, or on YouTube?
It's on YouTube and on Facebook.
Okay. Oh, it's right there in front of me on the screen. I should have read a little better. But yeah, so just a little background. So I'm Christian Rich. So I'm your ProAction Fluids representative for basically the whole upper Midwest. So I work with Vermeer Midwest at each of their individual stores. So if you need any technical help when you're on a bore, you're welcome to call me or call any of the specialists within the Vermeer Midwest group. So they have a lot of awesome technical expertise and a great ability to get you dialed in out in the field. So then we're pressed for time, so we'll get rolling through the product overview and application. Uh-oh, Kelsey got something that's not showing up there. There we go. Hey, it came up. All right, perfect. So when we're out drilling, there's really four main critical steps. I call them the 4 steps to success that enable our fluid system to do what it needs to do in the ground. So in order to properly formulate that fluid system, first we want to identify the soil, and then we'll determine the proper drilling fluid for that soil. And then from there, a couple other things that are going to determine the success of how well that bore goes is our tooling selection, and then also the fluid to solids ratio, or the amount of fluid we're actually pumping down hole. So all 4 of those things are extremely critical in order to being successful, especially as we start pulling back larger packages of product. For today's purposes and for the time we have available, we are going to focus on soil identification real briefly, and then we'll spend some time talking about each of the fluid products. So soil identification. So more often than not, what I find is a lot of folks already have some tribal knowledge from a specific area that they're drilling in, or if maybe they don't have that tribal knowledge, they're able to, just visually assess that soil and get a good understanding of the conditions that they're in, right? So these are just some good questions that you can ask yourself when you're prepping for a job. And then if there's situations where you're not exactly sure what type of soil you're in, we can gather soil from our entry pits or exit pits, or if you're fortunate enough to have core samples, all those things can help us determine what type of soil we're in. So once we know the soil, we can determine what drilling fluid we need to work with that soil condition. And if you're still unsure, there are some simple tools you can use to help dial in what you have for composition of that soil. So one is a shakeout test. We do have a video on our YouTube channel where you can view. Ronnie is one of our other reps. He actually does about a 5-minute video. So it's a shakeout test. It helps you determine what percentage of clay, silt, and sand you have in your bore path or in your soil sample. So from there, it helps you dial in what fluids you ought to be using. The other thing you can do, so if you think maybe you're in swelling clay, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If you think maybe you're in a swelling clay scenario, you can take and ball up some clay from that entry or exit pit. It's ideal if it's not already saturated with water or drilling fluid. So if you're drilling in an area that's really wet, and that subsoil is really wet, it might be difficult to test it. But if assuming it's still somewhat dry, you could take and ball it up, make 2 balls of the clay, drop one in a cup full of water, and drop the other one in a cup full of water that's been treated with some clay lock. And we'll talk about the clay lock here in a bit, and that'll give you a good indication of, okay, so am I actually in a swelling clay scenario, or maybe it's something I'm doing operationally that I need to modify. Maybe you need to be pumping more fluid, or maybe you need a different style of reamer, right? So there are some helpful tools out there, simple little things you can do probably with items you already have in your truck. So just a little background on the products real quick. So all of the products are formulated to be a one container. So whether that's a bag or a bottle, one container per 500 gallons. And that's our starting point. And we found, apologize if you hear kids screaming in the background, but what we've done is we've formulated that. So it's just basically simplify that mixing process to where it's a one package per 500 starting point for your mixes. So looking at the soil composition, so we're going to assume that we are in clay, and we're just going to say, hey, it's a sticky, reactive clay soil. So let's determine and talk about the different fluid options you have available to combat those conditions. So really the main additive you're going to be using is ProDrill. So the way I like to talk about ProDrill is as the backbone of your clay drilling fluid system. So it's really doing the majority of the work of breaking down that clay, carrying out of the hole. So when you think about a 500-gallon mix tank full of water, that water makes up a minimum usually of at least 96% of your mix. So we need to treat that water, right, so that it gives it the properties it needs to break down the clay, create the viscosity we need to carry those cuttings out of the hole. So ProDrill is what modifies the characteristics of that fluid system. So it's a viscosifier. So it's going to take that water, excuse me, it's going to add viscosity to it. That's what's going to help clean the hole. It's also a friction reducer. So if you're used to maybe conventionally you've used either just drilling with straight water or you've used bentonite and clay, you should notice a pretty substantial reduction in your rotation pressures, pullback pressures on your pipe when you use ProDrill versus a water only or a bentonite only type scenario. So excellent friction reducer. The polymer also, it disperses out in the tank, but then it has a charge on it. So what that does downhole, that charge on the polymer, or that charge that's now dispersed in your fluid system, it's going to combine with the clay cuttings. It's going to help break them down, but then it's also going to do what we call flock those clay cuttings. So it's going to kind of group them together, and I've got a picture on the next slide I'll show you, but it groups those cuttings together. So it should kind of look like I'll pull that up. It should kind of look like a oatmeal or a cottage cheese looking consistency. So that's a good indication that we've done a good job of breaking down the soil. The polymer has encapsulated it and it's lubricated it so that it flows through that bore column with minimal resistance or minimal pressure. And I'll show this little video, helps show what I'm talking about here. So you can see those cuttings are moving through the bore path pretty easily, coming out along the product nicely. We don't have thick, peanut butter consistency cuttings, so those are really ideal right there. So that's an indication that the contractor has his mix dialed in, he has his fluids to solids ratio dialed in, and he's probably using the right tooling, right? So that's really what we want to see is the cuttings broken down nicely like that. That means you've kind of got the whole process dialed in. Another thing on the ProDrill that makes it unique and very user-friendly is its ability to disperse well in a wide range of tank setups or mixing tank setups. So what we've found a lot in the field is some tanks might already have restrictions. Maybe they've got some buildup in the lines, or maybe it's a homemade tank that's not set up with really good agitation or roll jets in it. Or maybe it's like in this case, this picture is a 4,000 gallon frac tank, so not a ton of agitation. But the cool thing about the ProDrill is we've designed it to where when it hits the water, it disperses out, should disperse kind of like a cloud. And what that's going to allow that polymer to do is disperse and yield out and hydrate very quickly. So that means you have less time spent mixing mud. So just kind of some uplifts to your performance and your downtime there in terms of mixing. So that was ProDrill. So we always use ProDrill. That's the backbone of our clay drilling fluid system. So always use ProDrill when you're drilling in clay. Now, transitioning into some of the additives we can add with the ProDrill to provide additional benefits, we're going to start with ProDyne. So the way I want you to think about ProDyne is it's a 2-in-1 product. So the first thing it does is it actually softens water. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're pulling from a creek or a municipal water supply where that water is hard, or maybe you just don't know, what kind of quality water you have, you could add ProDyne to the tank first to help soften your water. So soft water, what that does is that enables our polymers or any additives we use to disperse more effectively and more fully, and then hydrate more fully as well. So treating your water up front helps you get the most bang for your buck out of the additives that you're adding to the tank. So that's one thing the ProDyne does. And then the other thing it does is it provides the benefits of a detergent without adding any foam. So if you think about a household detergent, maybe you're cleaning the dishes, creates some foam, right? But the cool thing about a detergent is it also takes away the stickiness, helps keep things clean, helps clean things up, right? So the ProDyne does that without adding any foam to your tank, even when you get into situations where you have high loadings of the ProDyne. So benefits of keeping the tools clean, helps keep everything cool. So it's important we keep the drilling head cool, obviously, and free of debris so that we can cut efficiently, steer efficiently, and then also keeping the electronics cool by not creating excessive downhole friction. So while ProDyne isn't a friction reducer, it has the added effect just by keeping things clean and preventing the clay on clay resistance you would see in a situation where you've got clay bound up on the drill head that's bound up or binding up with the clay in the borehole. Go to the next slide here. So as an example, so on the left-hand side here, and this is a good example of how, using a detergent, using ProDyne helps with also kind of some preventive maintenance. So on the left-hand side, you've got a situation where a contractor was just running water only. And as he's pulling those rods back, you can see it's pulling through the rod wiper. It's actually making its way, the clay's making its way up into the strike alert, the rollers, the vise dies. So then you start creating situations where you have excessive wear at the machine too. Not only the additional heat and friction that's created on the rods as well. So on the right-hand side, this would be an example of ProDyne and ProDrill. So you should have nice smooth cuttings, creamy cuttings that strip off easily. And I think what you'll find too is even if you're keeping good flow when you're drilling out and as you're pulling back and you've got some drilling fluid that's kind of puddled up around the drill rods as you're pulling them back, a lot of times these rods will be nearly clean before they even hit the rod wiper. So it does a very effective job at keeping things clean, keeping the front of your drill clean, and obviously the water softening component as well.
Hey, Christian, before we move on, can you talk about ProDyne in a vac?
Yeah, good question. So ProDyne can be added to a vac. So the benefit of that is since it's water-based, as you're adding it to your back tank, ideally you add it as you're filling the back tank, but even if you're not filling that back tank, you can add it through the top of those clean water tanks. It will disperse out, but then the advantage of that is it helps prevent the sticky clay soils that you're potholing, helps keep them from sticking inside of your back tubes, and it actually helps with clean out when you dump that back as well. Good question.
Thanks.
All right, so we've kind of addressed, we've talked about ProDrill as the kind of our base for our clay drilling fluid. Then we add our ProDyne if it's a situation where, maybe we've got hard water or it's a sticky clay, we'll add the ProDyne to help control those things. So when we get into a soil where, maybe you're drilling out and all of a sudden, you're cutting a good hole, you're keeping good flow, but then all of a sudden your rotation pressures continue to climb, or maybe you're pulling product back and you've already pre-reamed, but that hole seems like it's closing back down around maybe around your rods, your reamer, or the product as you're pulling it. You could be in a swelling clay scenario. So we talked about kind of doing a cup test where you take, ball up a couple chunks of the clay from your entry or exit pit, drop them in cups of water, one treated, one not treated, see if it's swelling. So that's a test you can do, but you may not figure it out until you're in the process of boring, right? So the product you would add to help combat the swelling clays is called clay lock. So the clay lock works with the ProDrill to create, think of it as I like to use water protectant for shoes as an example. So you spray that on your shoes, it kind of creates a water barrier. You don't necessarily even see it or know it's there, but it creates that barrier to protect your shoes from moisture, right? So we're kind of doing the same thing with the clay particles downhole. So we're combining the clay lock and the ProDrill together, and they're going to create that water barrier film around those clay cuttings. So the clay lock actually binds to the edges of the little clay platelets downhole, and it keeps them from separating and deconsolidating and swelling up in the bore path. So it basically prevents that clay, that super reactive clay, from drinking your fluid and continuing to swell. So this is, use clay lock as needed. You could, if you want to put it in every tank, you're more than welcome to, but really you only need it on a kind of an as needed basis. And there again, the starting point for dosage on the clay lock, we say 1 to 2 bags. We did do some things. We had a product called Polycap. It was also a clay inhibitor. We've now combined the two. So anything you would get this spring would have the benefit of both. So basically what it is it's a very, very efficient clay inhibitor. So we're really staying quite close to that 1 easy bag per 500 gallon loading. So if you do notice that your clay lock is a darker shade of blue when you pick it up next time, that's why. Just know that it's basically amped up to where it just works more efficiently. A little bit of an example here, excuse me, in terms of a clay swelling test. So this would be an industry standard clay swelling test. The clay lock on the right, and we'll just assume this is just water on the, or excuse me, clay lock on the left, and then we'll just assume water on the right. So the same amount of bentonite is added over a 24-hour period to each vial. And what you can see is the clay that's been treated with a clay inhibitor, clay lock in this instance, has about 50% of the volume of the clay that has swelled with the non-treated drilling fluid system. So kind of think about that downhole in terms of what that's going to create for issues on your rods or on your pullback when you're pulling back the product. So as a summary on the clay drilling fluids, so we always use ProDrill, and I'm going to continue to harp on that, but we always use ProDrill when we're drilling in clay. ProDine as needed for hard water or to control sticky clays, and then the clay lock as needed for the swelling or reactive clay soils. And then just a lot of times I will say guys do run ProDine, ProDrill together, and that's just simply for the benefit of softening that water up front before they add the ProDrill, and then obviously controlling the stickiness of the clay, keeping their tools clean. So just kind of using it somewhat as a preventative maintenance type item as well. But certainly not needed in every tank, but it's definitely an option. So as we transition out of the finer soils, the clays, and into sand, cobble, rock, we want to switch up what we're using for drilling fluids. So a ProDrill drilling fluid, a polymer on by itself, in the instance of ProDrill, as you get into a more permeable formation where there's less clay content. So for ProDrill, we say once you get to where you're starting to get in excess of 30% sand, so 70% clay, 30% sand, that's where you're going to want to transition into a product that's going to help seal off that hole, create better filtration control in those more permeable soils, and then also carry out those larger, more dense soil particles. So in the case of what we have for bentonite-free options, we have the Geo Sweep. So the Geo Sweep is a blend of dry polymers. So the biggest thing with Geo Sweep you got to be mindful of is when you're mixing it. So you want to add it to the tank slowly. So my recommended mixing process for this is all the flow going to your roll jets, mixer running at full throttle. So literally as much agitation as you can generate inside that tank. And then you can add that bag of, it's about 5 pounds, you want to add it over the course of about 2 minutes. So for every 5 pounds you add, try to take about 2 minutes to add that to the tank. Because what we're trying to do, as with any dry polymer, or even if you think about bentonite, our goal is to disperse all of those little dry particles so that they don't stick together. So if we can disperse them, allow them to hydrate in the tank with that tank agitating, it's going to keep from getting any of that settling effect that allows products to settle out to the bottom and stick, and ultimately kind of build up over time. So Geo Sweep, add it to the tank slowly over the course of a couple minutes. Allow that tank to mix about 10 minutes before you start drilling, and then just to be safe, I like to tell guys, let it continue to agitate, for a total of 20 minutes. That's just going to allow you to make sure that product is fully hydrated, dispersed. It's not going to settle out in the tank. So it just kind of helps eliminate any issues from that product being super sticky. So what that Geo Sweep is going to do then is it'll create a lot of viscosity in your tank. So you'll notice that probably one of the first things you'll notice as you're mixing it, if you've never used it before, is it gets super slimy. So that blend of polymers, what that's designed to do is provide additional filtration control beyond what the ProDrill does. So it's super important that we seal off the formation, because that's what creates hole stability. So a sealed hole is a hole we can put pressure against that formation then, right? So as long as we can put some pressure against that formation, That's going to help prevent that sand from collapsing in around our product. So it's going to add that additional, yep, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, we got a question from Bill Lewis. So with the Geo Sweep, do you recommend adding it through a Venturi mixing system or not?
You can. So what I tell guys is it's very sticky. So if you allow it to start to build up in that Venturi, over time you may plug it. So as long as you know that going in, you can do that. But my recommended process for that would be to make sure that product is actually going all the way down into that Venturi and you're not getting a lot of buildup around the inside of that hopper. You still want to add it slow. So sometimes guys have taken it and just dumped it in the Venturi, kind of like a sack of bentonite. You'll still want to add it slowly through that hopper. And then once you get it added through the hopper, transition that flow back to your roll jets. So that way we keep it off the bottom while it's hydrating, prevent it from building up and sticking to the bottom of that tank. So you can do that. It's just a little bit more technical in terms of how you need to do it. But you are welcome to add it that way.
Thanks.
Yep. The other thing it provides is additional gel strength. So the ProDrill has a little bit of gel strength to it when it combines with those clay cuttings, the clay soils down hole. So the Geo Sweep, the product itself, actually develops more gel strength than what the ProDrill will. So that's another thing we want to be mindful of as we get into more coarse soils, is we need to suspend those cuttings and remove them from the bore path. See if these videos play. They should. So this was in kind of a clay, gravel, the mixed soil. That's where Geo Sweep probably works the best, I would say, is in mixed soil conditions. So we've got gravel, we've got cobble, we've got some clay, sand. So very mixed. But the one thing you'll notice as he's kind of playing with it in his hands there is it's very elastic, so very stringy. So what's happening down hole, the elasticity of that product, the mixing energy we're creating with our bit or our reamer is binding up those soil particles into that kind of that elastic fluid. And that's what's going to pull those cuttings out of the hole. So it's a little different than than what you'd be used to in terms of how bentonite works. This is the same bore here in the middle. This would be installing the product on the other side. So like I said, very mixed soil conditions. And then this is a higher percentage sand soil, but still there's some clay content there. Carries out the cuttings very well. So this was a sandy or a sand with some clay content to it, and then also there's some gravel kind of bound up in it as well. And this was just a base loading, so this would be equivalent of 1 bag per 500 for that type of soil. And then in terms of kind of what's recommended throughout the Midwest, and this is a good recommendation, great starting point that the Midwest group has come up with, is an 8-inch diameter hole up to 500 feet. So that's a safe starting point. And you'll kind of learn more about the fluid, how it works. You can start to see the differences between how it works versus how, a bentonite-based fluid works in those soils, and kind of develop your comfort level from there. And then you can kind of, determine what size of bore path or what size of diameter of pipe you want to pull back with it. But as a good starting point, 8-inch diameter up to 500 feet. Oops. All right, so one thing we've added this year is some bentonite-based options. So this ProViz XP would be a bentonite additive. So I want to be clear on that. This is ideally used with bentonite. Most of the time, that's a situation where I'm into a porous sand or very coarse sand. Think of like a kitty litter consistency or floor dry consistency even. So pretty coarse, or into high water table type sugar sands. So situations where you don't have much for hole stability, your mix wants to get diluted out. That's situations where I'm still going to use a bentonite-based mix and then add some additives to it. So this mix actually came out of Western Michigan, or the idea behind it. So it wasn't uncommon to use, 2.5 bags of max bore, or, you name your brand of bentonite, plus 2.5 pounds of a pack, 2 to 2.5 pounds of a pack, 2 to 2.5 pounds of a xanthan type product, blend all that together, add it through the hopper. And then that's a pretty successful mix for those types of soils. So what we've done is simplified the process. So what we've got is a 5-pound bag. It's got a few different additives in it, but what it's going to do is amplify basically the natural benefits of that bentonite. So bentonite does a great job of adding gel strength to our fluid, meaning it does a great job of suspending cuttings when we're doing things like adding a rod or taking a rod out. Maybe you got to stop and mix mud. So the gel strength of that bentonite does a great job of suspending those cuttings while we're doing those other, functions of our job or parts of the operation. So bentonite on its own has good gel strength, but what we can do is we can add ProVis to it. It's going to increase the gel strength without substantially increasing the viscosity. And the reason why that's important, we talked about we're drilling out, we've created that filtration control. We want to keep some pressure against the formation to keep it stable. But the more bentonite you add, the thicker that drilling fluid is going to become. So then you increase your likelihood of having an inadvertent return or creating a bubble, humping a driveway, humping a road, whatever, just because you've got the viscosity of your drilling fluid too high. So what we would advocate is, you have a bentonite base, then you add additives to it to increase those properties, improve its ability to suspend cuttings without adding more bentonite and increasing the viscosity of the drilling fluid. So that's one thing the ProVis does. So it adds the gel strength. The other thing it does is improves and increases the filtration control. So think about your bentonite it's made up of platelets, right? So think about it like shingles on a roof. That's kind of how it seals the inside of a bore path. So shingles on a roof lay on top of each other, create a nice seal over your home, keep it protected. So the bentonite, what that does down hole, those platelets lay against the inside of the formation, kind of have that shingling effect, and they seal the hole, allow us to create the filter cake. So the ProVis has an additive in it. So when we get into more porous sands, you're still going to get some leak off even with a bentonite mix. So that ProVis, the other additive in it, helps seal off those voids and increase your filtration control, gives you a tighter, firmer filter cake, and allows you to do that without adding additional viscosity. Recommended dosage on that as well is 1 easy bag per 500 gallons. So pre-measured, pre-dosed. It's a pretty good economical solution for improving the properties of the bentonite in challenging soils. This is a case study. I won't spend too much time on this, but you can see the ground conditions. There's boulders, cobble, mixed soil with sand and clay. Whoops. Worked very well. So, and we were going under a river actually. So there we got into a situation where there was a wide variety of soil conditions, including wet sand. So we needed a drilling fluid that was capable of accommodating a wide variety of soils, right? So this was a bentonite base mix with a 1 bag per 500 equivalent of the ProVis added to it. So one thing y'all may have run into this or noticed it when you're running a polymer only system is you'll start to get, especially on a hot day, or maybe you've let your tank sit outside over the weekend and it's warm out. One thing that can happen is if there's any kind of bacteria in your mixing tank, that bacteria will start to feed off of the polymers in the system. So what that does then is it starts to create a foul odor, or in some instances actually start to turn the fluid system black. So the way we combat that is with the Drill Clean product. So pretty economical tool for cleaning up your drilling fluid system, or you can also use it for actually kind of on a preservative basis, I guess if you want to call it that. So maybe you go out to a job site and the locates didn't get called in, or machine breaks down, whatever, maybe a lot of things can happen, and you've already mixed up your tank full of fluid. So whether that be ProDrill or Geo Sweep, you could add Drill Clean 1 bag per 500 to the tank, and what that's going to do is it's going to disperse throughout that fluid. It's going to clean up any bacteria that was already in that tank, prevent it from breaking down the fluid, if you have to let it sit for a few days or over the weekend before you can come back and commence that job. So a lot of different ways you can use it. You could also use it in vac tanks to help control the algae growth. So if there's already a lot of algae in there, it might take a couple treatments to break it down and clean it out. But you can add it kind of as a preventive basis as well, just to help keep those the clean water saddle tanks on your vac clean. It'll also help with, like in the case of the vacs, it'll also help with the cutting efficiency as well. So a lot of benefit to it, and just a good little preventive maintenance tool. If you've been running heavy batches of bentonite and you're getting some settling in the bottom of the tanks, or just the natural buildup that occurs in the bottom of your tanks or in your lines, in the pump, Drill Clean will also break that down and clean it out. But the best part of it is you can do it with something that's at least environmentally friendly. Bleach is very aggressive, not great for the environment. So this is a good alternative in situations where you'd use bleach as well. Left-hand side, this is a contractor's tank that was vandalized. Actually, somebody dumped asphalt in it, and they had a hard time getting it cleaned out. They did a treatment with 2 bags of drill clean. This is a 500-gallon mixed tank, I believe. 2 bags of drill clean allowed to agitate for 30 to 40 minutes, and then they actually let it sit overnight, which works great. Gives it time to fully activate and break everything down. And the next day, they were able to flush everything out the tank.
Should you use those, that drill clean in vacs too?
Yes, yep, you can use it in vacs. Yep, absolutely. With the drill clean, if I were going to add it to a vac tank, I'd add it while we're filling it, or even take your wand and give it some agitation after you've added it. It's just a little white granule, but it just disperses into the water. But ideally, you'd kind of give it some dispersion as you're adding it, just so it kind of mixes throughout the tank faster.
Got it.
But yeah, that'll help control any issues you're having with algae in your vac tanks. So that covers the base of the product. So I just wanted to hit on a few tools or areas where you can find more information. So all the cases of product that you'd get from the Vermeer Midwest stores, they should have a mixing chart on the back of the box. So on the front, you have the product label. On the back, there'll be an actual mixing chart. So this is going to be your guide to help you kind of dial in at least your baseline of how much of each product to use in each tank, just kind of depending on your soil conditions. It does give you some questions to answer to help guide that and help guide you in terms of what to use. So just a helpful little tool. We also have tank stickers available. So these charts, stick right on the side of your mix tank. Same thing, just gives you all the basics of what your baseline dosages need to be of the product. And from there, if you're into a more technical scenario, maybe you need to add the products in a different way. That's always a situation where you call the drill specialist at Vermeer, call myself, we can help you dial in for those more technical bores. The mobile app also has a lot of good info on it. It's a pretty simple app. It's got, should have mixing charts. It's got all the product info, including SDS sheets, which is always handy to have in your back pocket, right? Because you never know when somebody's going to walk up on the job and ask for an SDS sheet on the products you're using. So mixing instruction, SDS sheets, and then also you should be able to find a product overview sheet. Kind of hits on some of the high level information that we went over today, but full of a lot of good info. And there again, kind of coming to the end of it here, but so these would be your key contacts throughout Vermeer Midwest. So you got Paul, covers the state of Indiana. CJ covers Central Illinois. And you've got Brett at the Aurora store. Rob up in Michigan. Doug down in Missouri and Southern Illinois. So all super guys, do a great job. I've learned a lot from each of them. So very, very good resources for everybody to use in case if you get into a situation where you need some technical help. Of course, I'm always available as well. I'm always happy to help with dialing in the fluids, helping you with tooling selection if you need help with something like that. Even I can help kind of guide that at least. So really anything with the bore, everybody on there is going to be happy to help you. So we do have a promotion going on. Kelsey, if you want to talk about this, you're welcome to.
Yeah, so just so you guys all know, we've talked about this, I think, in every training so far, but we've got from now until May 15th, if you buy a case of drill fluids, we'll have a golden ticket hidden in one of them in every one of our locations. So you have a chance to win no matter where you're at. But you'll get a cooler. It's filled with some cool Pro Action swag and more Vermeer Midwest swag as well. So make sure you go out and get that fluid before May 15th for a chance to win.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
And now's a good time for any questions. I'll pull up that chat as well. You're welcome to read them as well, Kelsey, if there's anything new.
Cool. Yeah, it was great questions while we were going through, guys. Feel free to keep asking questions now if you've got any more.
Yeah, and I've got one as well here. So if sometimes we get the question if ProAction products are compatible with bentonite. So it's important to know they are all compatible. What matters is your mixing process. So if you were ever to add any of the additives to your bentonite. Just make sure your bentonite is fully hydrated and yielded out prior to adding a ProDine or a clay lock, or you could even add ProDrill or Geo Sweep and light loading. So there is some flexibility to the products if you're in unique situations, or maybe there's a competitive product that you've been using in that way with your bentonite. The Pro Action products can do that as well. They are compatible. So just be sure to reach out to myself or one of the Vermeer Midwest reps, and we can help you dial that in if you are in kind of a more unique scenario.
Oh, one other question, since we're dealing with some snow currently. Do any of the Pro Action products freeze?
Yeah, good question. So the ProDine and the clay lock are both water-based, but they do have an antifreeze component blended into those. So it should give you protection down to about 20 degrees before they start to kind of get slushy or start to freeze up. So guys oftentimes do work when it's below freezing. They're just more mindful about how they're doing things, right? So you can do that, or you can still use the products when it is below freezing. Even if they do start to get pretty slushy, as long as you can get them in the tank, they're still going to disperse and activate like they're intended to. So even if they freeze, it's not going to ruin the product. So there's no shelf life. And then on the ProDrill, so it has a biodegradable mineral oil base that the polymer is actually suspended in that package. So the only thing that's going to happen there is it's going to become more viscous. So it might become a little more difficult to get out of the container. But same thing, once you get it in the tank, when it's cold, it might take more agitation than when it's warm, obviously, just because it's going to be more viscous. It's going to take a little more mixing energy to disperse it. But there again, it's perfectly fine using the winter. The Geo Sweep, it's a dry, so no issues there. There again, you may have to let it mix longer because cold water, everything takes longer to mix in cold water. So just be mindful of that. So no, all the drilling fluid products work well even below freezing.
Great. Oh, one more question here. Do you have to run every product in every tank?
No, good question. And we've got a question from Bill. I'll come to that after. But no, you do not have to run every product in every tank. So sometimes there can be some misconceptions around that where you think you've got to run everything all at once. You definitely don't have to do that. My recommendation is in clay, always run ProDrill, and then your ProDine as needed to keep things clean, clay lock as needed for your swelling clay scenarios. And then I've got a question from Bill. He says, we've got ProDine bags that have crystallized parts in the bag. What can we do to prevent this? Is a shelf life issue. So yeah, that can happen. I've seen it happen after freezing. You will get some stuff that might separate. If it's not crystallized, you can shake it back up and it's not going to cause any issues that way. The crystallized stuff, even that, if you can get it out of the container into the tank, it'll disperse. Basically, it needs more free water just to kind of reactivate. We have done some things to tweak that. You really shouldn't notice it anymore. But yeah, there were some, I do know, sometime last year we changed that, just tweaked it just a little bit, so it should be preventing that now. But if you ever do run into an issue like that, you think there's a quality concern, please do let Vermeer know or reach out to myself, and we'll make sure we get you taken care of.
All right, well, so far that's the only questions we've got for now. We can hold on one more minute and see if anybody else has got anything. But other than that, you guys are free to head out, and we'll be here if you have any other questions, and you can always shoot us an email or give us a call.
Yep, awesome.
And we'd love to
also
hear
available.
any feedback you've got too. So feel free to email me directly if you have other topics that you want to cover in these Friday classes, or if you have any other questions that you need to get forwarded on to Christian. So.
Yep. It's also based, again, it's always, it's available on Facebook and on the YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out if you missed parts of it as well.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll head on out. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Christian.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. You bet. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Appreciate it.